Part 4. We believe we have already said enough concerning the difference between factory councils and politico-administrative councils of workers and peasants. The factory council represents workers' interests which extend no farther than the narrow circle of an industrial firm. Under a communist regime, it is the basic unit of the system of workers' control, which has a certain part to play in the system of councils of the economy, a system which will eventually take over the technical and economic management of production. But the factory council has nothing to do with the system of political soviets, the depositories of proletarian power. Under the bourgeois regime, therefore, the factory council, or for that matter the trade union, cannot be viewed as an organ for the conquest of political power. If, on the other hand, one were to view them as organs for the emancipation of the proletariat via a route that does not involve the revolutionary conquest of power, one would be lapsing into the syndicalist era. The comrades around Lodin Novo are hardly correct when they maintain, as they have done in polemic with Guerra de Classe, that the factory council movement, as they theorize it, is not in some sense a syndicalist movement. Marxism is characterized by its prediction that the proletariat struggle for emancipation will be divided into a number of great historical phases, in which political activity and economic activity vary enormously in importance. The struggle for power, the exercise for power, or the dictatorship of the proletariat, in the transformation of the economy, the society without classes and without a political state. To identify, in the role of the liberation organs of the proletariat, the stages of the political process with their economic counterparts is to lap into the petty bourgeois caricature of Marxism called economism, which in turn can be classified into reformism and syndicalism. Overemphasis on the factory council is just a resurrection of this hoary old era, which unites the petty bourgeois Proudhon with all those revisionists who believe they have transcended Marx. Under a bourgeois regime, then, the factory council represents the interests of the workers in a particular enterprise, just as it will do under a communist regime. It arises when circumstances demand it, through changes in the methods of proletarian economic organization. But perhaps to an even greater extent than the trade union, the council opens its flank to the deviations of reformism. The old minimalist tendency that argues in favor of compulsory arbitration and profit-sharing by workers, that is, their participation in the management and administration of the factory, could well find in the factory council the basis for the drafting of an anti-revolutionary piece of social legislation. This is happening in Germany at the moment, where the independents are opposing not the principle, but the manner of the draft of legislation, in stark contrast to the communists, who maintain that the democratic regime cannot grant the proletariat any form of control whatsoever over capitalist functions. It should thus be clear that it makes no sense to speak of workers' control until political power rests in the hands of the proletarian state. Such control can only be exercised as a prelude to the socialization of firms and their administration by appropriate organs of the collectivity, in the name of the proletarian state and on the basis of its power. Councils of workers, industrial workers, peasants, and on occasion soldiers, are, as is clear, the political organs of the proletariat, the foundations of the proletarian state. The urban and rural local councils take the place of the municipal councils under the bourgeois regime. The provincial and regional soviets take the place of the present provincial councils, with this difference, that the provincial soviets are not elected directly, but indirectly from the local soviets. The State Congress of Soviets, together with the Central Executive Committee, take the place of the bourgeois parliament, with the difference again that they are not elected directly, but by third or even fourth degree suffrage. There is no need here to emphasize the other differences, of which the most important is the elector's right of recall of any delegate at any time. If the mechanism to cope with these recalls is to be flexible, then the elections in the first place should not be based on lists of candidates, but should involve giving a single delegate to a grouping of electors who, if possible, should live and work together. But the fundamental characteristic of this whole system does not reside in these technicalities, which have nothing magical about them, but rather in the principle which lays down that the right to vote, both actively and passively, is reserved to the workers alone and denied to the bourgeois. As far as the formation of municipal soviets is concerned, two errors are commonly encountered. One is the idea that delegates to the soviets are elected by factory councils and committees, executive commissions of the councils of workshop delegates. Whereas, in fact, as we make no apology for repeating, the delegates are elected directly by the mass of electors. This error is reproduced in the Bombaci proposal for establishing Soviets in Italy. The other error consists in thinking that the Soviet is a body composed of representatives simply nominated by the Socialist Party, the trade unions, and the factory councils. Comrade Ambrosini, for example, makes this error in his proposals. Such a system might perhaps be useful in order to form Soviets quickly and on a provisional basis, but it does not correspond to the definitive structure. It is true that in Russia, a small percentage of delegates to the Soviet are added to those elected directly by the proletarian electors. But in reality, the Communist Party, or any other party, obtains its representation by standing tried and proven members of its organization as candidates, and by campaigning around its program before the electorate. In our view, a Soviet can only be recalled revolutionary when a majority of its delegates are members of the Communist Party. All of this, it should be understood, refers to the period of the proletarian dictatorship. Now we come to the vexed question: what should be the role and characteristics of the workers' councils while the power of the bourgeoisie is still intact? In Central Europe at the moment, workers' councils coexist with the bourgeois democratic state, which is all the more anti-revolutionary in that it is republican and social democratic. What is the significance of this proletarian representative system if it is not the depository and foundation of state power? At the very least, does it act as an effective organ of struggle for the realization of the proletarian dictatorship? These questions are answered by the Austrian comrade Otto Marschall in an article we came across in the Geneva journal Nouvelle Internationale. He states that in Austria, the councils have brought about their own paralysis and have handed over their power to the National Bourgeois Assembly. In Germany, on the other hand, according to Marschall, once the majoritarians and independents had left the councils, these latter became true foci of the struggle for proletarian emancipation, and Nosk had to smash them in order to allow social democracy to govern. In Austria, however, Marschall concludes the existence of councils within the democratic system, or rather, the existence of democracy in spite of the councils, proves that these workers' councils are far from playing the role of what are called Soviets in Russia. And he expresses the doubt that perhaps at the moment of the revolution, alternative, truly revolutionary Soviets may emerge and become the depositories of proletarian power in place of these domesticated versions. The party program adopted at Bologna declares that Soviets should be set up in Italy as organs of revolutionary struggle. The object of the Bombaci proposal is to concretize this aim. Before getting down to details, let us discuss the general ideas which has inspired Comrade Bombaci. First of all, and let no one accuse us of being pedantic, let us request a formal clarification. In the phrase, only a national institution that is broader than the Soviets can usher the present period towards the final revolutionary struggle against the bourgeois regime and its democratic mask, parliamentarism. Does it mean that parliamentarism is the aforementioned broader institution, or is it the democratic mask? We fear that the first interpretation must be the right one, a feeling which is confirmed by the paragraph on the Soviets' program of action, which is a strange mixture of the functions of the latter with the party's parliamentary activity. If the councils to be set up are to carry out their activities on this ambiguous terrain, then it would certainly be better to not set them up at all. The idea that the Soviets should have the role of working out proposals for socialist and revolutionary legislation, which socialist deputies will place before the bourgeois state, here we have a proposal that makes a fine pair with the one on communal electionist Sovietism, which was so well demolished by our own DL. For the moment, we shall go no further than remind the comrades who put forward such proposals of one of Lenin's conclusions in the declaration adopted by the Moscow Congress. Put a distance between yourselves and those who delude the proletariat by proclaiming the possibility of their victories within the bourgeois framework, and propose that the new proletarian organs should combine with or collaborate with the instruments of bourgeois domination. If the former are the Social Democrats, who are still members of our party, should we not recognize that the latter in the electionist maximalists, concerned as they are with justifying their parliamentary and communal activity by monstrous pseudo-Soviet projects? Are the comrades in the faction which was victorious at Bologna blind to the fact that these people are not even in line with that form of communist electionism which may legitimately be opposed, on the basis of the arguments of Lenin and certain German communists, to our own irreducible principled abstentionism?